Pepper plants have been transplanted to their permanent containers, and I've been using again plain potting soil, no brand, the cheapest stuff on the market. These containers are about 20 liters, and at the bottom there's about 5 centimeters of hydro rock, just to provide a little bit of an area where the water can drain out a little bit easier. And by the way, these plants have been transplanted to a 2-liter container about 2 weeks ago, so they're very fresh. It was just 2 weeks ago when I transplanted my plant from P6 to a 2-liter container. And guess what? They're already rooted with the technique I used, which was taking the plants, soaking them in water, fertilizer and booster to accelerate root growth, and then I transplanted them to a 2-liter container. Kept the soil pretty dry, moist obviously, but dry in comparison to a lot of people. And you see that all the roots are developing, and it's completely full of roots, as you can see here. So these containers are about 20 liters, and in the bottom I have a space of about, I don't know, maybe 3, maybe 4 centimeters of hydro rocks or clay pebbles, and it's just going to provide an area where water can drain, but also CO2 and air can move around. Plants need to develop their roots, and they need water, they need air, they need CO2 in the root area. So selecting the correct container is very important, especially for people that are used to use a lot of water. In Holland, in the States, in England, in many places where people are growing peppers, tomatoes or even cannabis, they're using about 10-liter containers, 15-liter containers, 20-liter containers. And in most cases, because they work and they don't have the time to nourish those plants, they use a lot of water at once, and they give a Monday, I don't know, 10 liters of water, and they hope that they can do a complete week without watering it. And it's actually horrible for the plants because they get so much water at once that the soil is completely soaked. There's not enough air going around it, so it's going to get anaerobic, so it's going to create bacteria and funguses you don't want to create. Yeah, CO2 is not going around. Plants are getting waterlogged, which means that they don't take up water and nutrients. It's a really bad way of growing. And at the end of the week, when the soil dries out, guess what? The plants start growing a little bit, but then it's Sunday again and people are dumping water again. So the ideal container for peppers is between 15 and 20 liters, maybe upwards to 25 liters, but above that it's just going to be a mess because it's going to be wet all the time, and plants don't like to grow in a wet environment. You're better off growing in a smaller container, which dries out a little bit faster, but you have the control of how much water you're giving those plants, especially when you use a system called Blumat. In the past 5 to 7 years I've been using Blumat systems. So this is one of the cones, it's one of the sensors, and it works with a ceramic cone that when it dries out, it's gonna pull a vacuum and it's gonna release a valve, and when the valve is released, it's actually going to drip a little bit of water and nutrients depending on if you're using fertilizer or not. And when the cone is saturated again, it's going to release the valve and it's going to close down the system. It works by gravity, so there's no need for electricity, there's just need for a barrel of water that's a little bit higher than the system itself. And this system is going to give enough water to the plants without overwatering it and over fertilizing it. So it's an amazing system. It's not cheap because these cones cost between €2.50 upwards to €5 these days. But guess what? I don't need to water my plants each and every day. So the plants get the water when it's needed with the Blumat system. They get water with fertilizer, with fruit fuel. And the only thing I have to do is check once in 2 weeks so the nipples don't get clogged up with debris or calcium or all that. Using a smaller container with a Blumat system, obviously fruit fuel to supply it with enough fertilizer. So the reason why I'm using smaller containers is, first of all, I don't like it when containers are saturated with water for too long of a time, because it's gonna introduce bacteria and funguses that gonna create root rot, stem rot and all that. And it's really annoying, especially when you live in an area where it's wet for a couple of months, because here in Holland it's gonna rain for a couple of months, especially in June, July. Yeah, plants don't like it when they're wet all the time, so I'd rather use a smaller container which dries out a little bit faster. You do need water. I'd rather do it by a system that has the capability of triggering by itself and not relying on my thumb or my finger. Well, I'm gonna fill up this bucket with soil. By the way, it's still cheap soil. It's about €3 or something like that per 40 liters, which is about $1.50 at 20 liters. So yeah, it's still really cheap. So within 2 weeks you can see the development of the roots, and they're white and healthy. So the potting soil I'm using is from the Gamma, is Fertilizer or whatever you call it. It's about €3, €3.50, something like that per 40 liters. So it's pretty cheap. We need for fancy brand potting soil because it's not going to do anything else. It has a little bit more fertilizer in it, but still, it's it's drained of fertilizer within a couple of weeks, especially with plants like peppers and tomatoes. So I have to apologize. I didn't use a filter on the camera when I filmed outside, but it's good enough. It's just YouTube, right? Also, I'm using a Xiaomi plant sensor. It measures the amount of water, it measures the amount of nutrients by EC, by the way, so don't rely too much on it, because in some nitrogen sources they don't have any metallic ions in them, so relying on an EC in the soil is not really reliable. But below a certain level you actually can expect that there's no longer any fertilizer in the soil. So that's the reason why I'm using these sensors. I'm not relying exactly on the EC value, so hopefully the cat doesn't shit in my soil, but yeah, it's probably gonna happen at some point. So it's going to be 30 fruit fuel. At the end of the season, I don't work with potting soil anymore. I'm going to throw it away because it's completely depleted. Yes, I can use compost. Yes, I can use something like worm tea. Yes, I can use additives to renew it again. But I'd rather use fresh potting soil. So the reason why I don't use or reuse potting soil from the previous season is pathogens and viruses, especially from tomatoes and also peppers and bell peppers. They're known to kill other crops, and they're known to thrive in soil for a couple of years. So when you're going to reuse old potting soil, which is completely depleted, and where you grew in peppers and tomatoes, it has the capability to destroy your next crop. So I'd rather not use old potting soil for that reason. Also, I'm not using any perlite or additives to aerate the soil, because I'm using something called living soil. There are bacteria, there are funguses, and they're going to work around in the soil, break it up and keep it loose. And it's going to provide a lot of CO2 because funguses create CO2. The bacteria, especially in mycorrhiza, it's going to provide a healthy, thriving rhizosphere for the plants to grow in. And all the organics are going to break down to of all those funguses and bacteria. And because there's an excess of good funguses and bacteria, I'm going to keep the bad ones away. So I chose living soil over perlite, which is not going to do anything except for a little bit of aeration in the soil. Yeah, I'd rather use a product that has more capabilities than using a single product that in most gardens they will not allow when you throw it in the garden, especially in organic gardens these days, or moestuins or volktuins, called it here in Holland. They don't allow when you throw old potting soil with perlite in it. They don't allow it, and the reason is, yeah, it's not really organic, they're gonna claim, whatever. So I'd rather use plain potting soil with no additives, just a little bit of hydro rocks at the bottom, but I can separate it pretty easy. So I'm gonna do exactly the same thing with this container as I did in my last video, which was I'm not gonna water the fresh potting soil right now. At the barrier where the pot is transplanted in the fresh potting soil, it's going to be a drier environment, and therefore the plants get a signal to send out more roots to find water and fertilizer. And more hoods means I get a bigger plant and more production in a shorter period of time. It's not the way that a lot of old timers work, but it's science, it works. It's one of the most efficient ways of transplanting plants, because a lot of people these days just place a plant in a pot, dump a lot of water around and hope for the best. And that's actually the worst thing you can do. Now it's just a waiting game, because eventually the sensors will trigger and they're gonna say I need to water it, but then I'm gonna water it with a little bit of water, V-booster and living soil. And eventually the sensors will trigger again because the lack of nutrients. And then I have to fertilize it with fruit fuel. And that's gonna be, I don't know, maybe in 3 weeks. So now I don't need to water them for at least a week. And I don't need to fertilize them for at least 3 weeks, because there's enough fertilizer in the soil to sustain it for a couple of weeks. The only thing I have to do is each time when the temperature drops below 12 degrees Celsius, I need to place them indoors, otherwise they're gonna develop a stress hormone. It's the same hormone that says to plants that they need to drop their leaves. The stress hormone ABA, which is a growth hormone, has the capability of dropping all the leaves of the plants, because it's triggering the plants to think that it's autumn and it has to protect itself for winter. And it happens below 12 degrees Celsius. So below 12 degrees, the plants have the capability of making that stress hormone in order to trigger that it has to protect itself. So when it's below 12 degrees Celsius, or at least when I know that it's going to be below 12 degrees Celsius, I have to take the plants indoors. And when it's above 12 degrees Celsius, I take my plants outdoors. It's a lot of work, but it's only 6 plants, so it's a little bit easier. I'm happy with the results, and the plants are thriving. They're healthy, they're making new leaves, and they're in their buckets, and I don't have to do anything else. So if you have any questions about the fertilizer, the supplements, the growth regime I'm using, just place a comment in the comment section or mail at info@nutrigrowsolutions.com.